So I want to welcome everybody in this afternoon. This is Strategies for Success and Well-Being for Academic Parents or people who may be pursuing an academic career who are not there yet or who are not parents yet. I think in today's session, you'll be able to get a lot of great insights into how to balance those responsibilities of being a parent with those responsibilities of having a successful career. So I'm really excited. I do want to share with you a little bit of background about our center and who we are before we get started. So we are the LS-PAC Model Center. We are an NSF-funded Lewis Stokes Regional Center of Excellence. So we are in the group of Lewis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation, but we are a regional center. We are dedicated to preparing historically underrepresented scholars for academic careers in STEM. So we really work on creating pathways for these scholars to pursue academic careers. And we target undergrad, grad student, postdoc, and early career faculty who we define as being in the first 4 years of a faculty position. We have mentoring opportunities, networking opportunities, and professional development opportunities like this one. We also have an app that we have designed that is for the purposes of mentoring. And on this app, people can create a profile, they can search for compatible mentors or mentees, and you can communicate there. There's also a feed of posts and things like that. So we're really excited about this platform. And you can find more on our website, which is lspacmodels.org. And I'll put that in the chat a little bit later. I will also put in the chat our link to our page about how you can get involved as a scholar or a mentor or a partner. So let me go ahead and paste that in. So feel free to check that out for more information on us. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our facilitator today, Dr. Kaitlin Mallouk.
Wonderful. Thanks, Robert. I'm so glad to have all of you here, and I'm especially thrilled to have our wonderful panelists who represent a really nice cross-section of folks who are in academia and are also parents. I do want to recognize that although we do have a very diverse group of panelists, our panelists, of course, does not represent the complete range of lived experiences of parents in STEM academic positions. So, just keep that in mind. This is 5 people's experiences and recommendations, and they may or may not work for you, but we hope that some of their ideas do. I know we have a couple polls so we can get a sense of who you all are. So I'd like to ask Rob to start launching those as I just give a brief introduction to the panel. So I'm Kaitlin Mallouk. I'm a tenured assistant professor of experiential engineering education at Rowan University, where I've been advocating for parental rights with limited success since 2013. I have a 9-year-old who was born while I was in graduate school at University of Illinois, and a 5-year-old who was born in the 3rd year of my 5-year tenure process. So it looks like so far we have 13 folks who already have children with us and 5 who don't have children but are thinking about having children. So that's great. I'm hoping we're able to provide both groups of people with some strategies that have worked for us. And then maybe we can switch over to that next poll. And as these polls are wrapping up, we will, let me just give you an overview of what we're planning to do today. I'll do a quick screen share. So we have, hoping that you're looking at the right screen. Our panelists are going to introduce themselves and share their #1 strategy for success and well-being. We'll then do a large group Q&A, mostly guided by the previously submitted questions. Y'all have had some really amazing questions. Then we'll break into small groups. Each breakout room will have one of the panelists, and then we'll at the very end report out from those small groups. All right, let's see. Are you all seeing the second poll?
I think I accidentally ended it, Kaitlin.
Okay.
Let me try to, okay, relaunch. Here we go.
Cool.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So you should be seeing a poll about your support structure in your parenting journey. Okay, so it looks like everyone is parenting. Most people are parenting with a partner or spouse. And then we have a couple people who are parenting with family support. So that's great.
All right, you want to go into the next one?
Yeah, we can do that.
All right, I'm gonna launch this third poll.
Okay, and then we're just trying to figure out how old your kids are, because there's different strategies depending on if you have tiny little kids or school-aged kids or teenage kids. All right, well, we sort of, the most 7 out of 15 said 0 to 2 years, but then we have folks with age range all the way up to 16 years. So we have quite a wide spectrum there. All right, and then I think there's one more poll, and then we'll introduce you to our panelists. All right, so this one, give us a sense of where you are in your careers. Okay, so some grad students, some postdocs, some early career folks, and some senior faculty. Awesome. It's good to have those senior faculty in there to advocate for parents. Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing that information. All right, so we're going to move into the introduction of our panelists. So what I've asked our panelists to do is when they introduce themselves,
I know Kaitlin said that she might be having some internet issues, so I'm gonna give her a second to see if she comes back. And if not, then I will go ahead and ask you all to introduce yourselves. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask you all to go ahead and introduce yourselves. I don't know if she had an order that she was planning to go in, but I'm gonna go in the order that I see here on my screen. And I'm thinking she'll probably be back in just a second. But I see Dr. Mersey.
take it away, Rob.
Okay,
I was gonna say, Kaitlin is back. Kaitlin, you wanna finish what you were saying?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I would love to ask you all. We're going to have each person introduce themselves and share their #1 strategy. So I'm just going to put in the chat what I'm hoping you all will say. And then once you have introduced yourselves, we will start the large group Q&A, and hopefully my internet will keep working. I'm on campus, so I'm not sure what's happening. Omira, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start, sure. Once I see the chat to make sure. Well, I can start introducing myself. I'm Omero Morsi. I'm an assistant professor in engineering education at Virginia Tech. I have an interest career path, so I'm an assistant professor right now, going for tenure for the second time. I have 16 years of experience in academia. I'm originally from Venezuela. I did my first academic career there, and then I had to leave the country. So I'm a forced immigrant here in the US. I have 2 kids, 2 boys. One is 13, the other one is 6. I had my first kid when I was actually going up for tenure the first time. And I had my second kid when I was a PhD student here at Virginia Tech. I also did a PhD here. So that's kind of the background of when I had my kids. And again, my career path involves sometime in industry, sometime in academia. I'm thinking about when I had kids. And then some big transitions like moving to 3 different countries and being a grad student and now going for a different type of tenure here at Virginia Tech. It will be very difficult, sorry, to have just one strategy because I really don't think I have like the good one strategy. I have instead a lot of small things that when I was reflecting about this, I thought, okay, what are the top 2 or 3 things that really have made a difference? And I think the first one is, I mean, both are really simple, to be honest, but effective in my mind. So the first one is, I think one of the biggest issues is, especially for all of us in academia, is that we get tired really quick. We keep, overburdening ourselves in this culture that is not very supportive of having a life. So one of the strategies that I have something that I call the 3 barriers before joining anything new. And that can be new projects, new service, new roles, new anything, new papers, you name it. So I have 3 steps that I need to fulfill every single time. The first one is I need to ask at least one of my mentors about it. And that also implicitly there is that I have a lot of mentors. I have mentors for academic things. I have mentors for personal things. I have mentors for international Venezuelan things. You name it, I will have mentors in all spaces. So my rule is to ask at least one of them and make sure what I'm thinking makes sense. Then the second one is think how that will directly benefit whatever my goal is. And at this moment is to get tenure at Virginia Tech. So every time I will commit to something, I need to see the clear connection between that and tenure. And where I even envision myself where I'm going to put this in my dossier. So that's another checkpoint. And then the last one is to estimate the amount of time that project will take up to the most minimal tasks. So that includes understanding how much time will it take for me to send an email to get people together? How much time will it take to plan the Zoom link? I mean, I really go to the craziest possible level of minimal things that require time because we tend to overlook those. So I really include all those little things in my plan. So I think that's one of the things before committing to something. But the other strategy that I wanted to share, and this is most a pandemic type of strategy, because I think that's the other layer of complexity that we are facing. We are facing, not only this life that is complicated by itself, but also the last 2 or 3 years have been really interesting. It involves a lot of reflection and a lot of understanding where the trigger points are and what are the things that I can live with and what are the things that I cannot accept or that really trigger something in me. So at the beginning, I decided, or me and my partner decided to, you know what, we cannot do it all. What are we letting go? And we had a serious conversation about that. And at that moment, letting go was, the house is going to be a mess. And that's going to be okay, right? But then it's interesting because as I was moving forward, I thought that was something I could let go and I couldn't. But it took a lot of self-reflection and a lot of awareness for me to come back and say, hey, you know what we said about this? I freak out every time I see all the clothes, the kids' clothes in the floor and the mess. Sorry, it's giving me more anxiety than peace. So I decided to take the active role of, okay, I'm gonna be, taking care of the house in that sense. And I know my partner can live with that. So I'm like, okay, that will be your space. You don't need to worry about this anymore. So a lot of communication, a lot of making commitments and trade-offs and negotiating things. So for me right now is, I'm not gonna pay attention to screen time for my kids. And I can live with that. I'm letting that one go. I think it's really having those conversations and selecting, okay, what things can I live with and what things are really, really bothering me about my structure, our rules, our culture, our house, that, we can negotiate and we can. And really having a lot of reflections about that. But more importantly, going back and rethink if our decisions were right or not. And just being able to accept that we made wrong decisions and say, yeah, that didn't work. Let's move on. Let's replan, and do that often, and have that open conversation, and, you know, minimizing stressors. That's what I would say. I will stop right here. Sorry, I don't have one big strategy, but those things that I thought about.
Yeah, I think those are wonderful, and things that folks can implement right away. So thank you. I'm just going to go across my screen. So Skylar, you're up next.
I am Skylar Stewart-Clark. I am a tenure track assistant professor, actually in the process of going up for promotion to associate professor at the Charleston Southern University Physician Assistant Program. I too kind of had a winding career path. So my bachelor's and doctorate degrees are in biomedical engineering. I did a postdoc. I was a research assistant professor prior to going back to school again to become a physician assistant. And so I think that's kind of important to consider as I'm sharing information with you all. Also, I have 4 children. So my first is now 14. He'll be 15 in a couple of weeks. And he was born while I was working on my doctorate. My second was born during my postdoc. My third was born towards the end of my training as a PA. And then my fourth was born essentially when I kind of restarted my academic career as an assistant professor. And so they are 14, 12, 5, and 3. And my 14-year-old has special needs. He's on the spectrum, has required a lot of therapy and really intense supports, you know, throughout his upbringing to kind of ensure he's as independent as possible. And so that also, I think, kind of frames how I approach things. And so in terms of moving towards a successful strategy for me, one is sort of unapologetically just being a wife and a mom. And that kind of supersedes everything else that I do. And that's the lens that I think if I'm in a position where I'm conflicted or there's some internal discord, I sort of go back to just, first of all, I'm a mom and a wife. Secondly, I'm a professor. And I think that just helps me sort of kind of, to speaking to what Romero said, my phrase is like intentionally dropping the ball on something, to just drop the ball and prioritize things in terms of my values. And so that obviously comes with being self-aware, reflecting, doing a self-assessment. And the other really practical thing that I had come across specifically during COVID, when I was teaching online remotely and homeschooling 4 children, which was pretty intense. And for part of that time, my husband was traveling and he was out of the country. There's this framework called 10-10-10 by Susie Welch, who I believe she's like a business person. She's been featured on MSNBC and a couple of other news outlets. But that framework specifically speaks to thinking about if you come across a decision that's conflicting, is it going to matter? Or what would the impact be in the next 10 minutes? What would the impact be in the next 10 months? And then what would that be in the next 10 years? And that was really, really helpful for me during COVID. Again, managing 4 different kids' schedules and homework and responsibilities, and still trying to, in my case, make sure I've got enough to put in my dossier for knowing that I was going up for promotion this year, to kind of go, okay, if I just stop and hang out with my kids, or one of them wanted to play Legos, it was 10 o'clock at night one time. It's like, is this really going to have a significant impact in the next 10 years? Nope. Next 10 months, probably not. It's going to throw me off track for the next 10 minutes. I can kind of accept that. So I think that that's something that can be extremely practical and sort of balances the values and maybe the emotions sometimes if you feel like you have to make a decision, and then that logical peace of mind that kind of gives equal value to all of those. So hopefully that's helpful.
Wonderful. Yes, I have not heard about that, but I think that's a super useful framework. Thank you, Skylar. Gracia, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gracia Vieira. I'm a professor of chemistry at Louisiana State University, and I'm originally from Portugal. I came to the US for my PhD, graduated in 1990 with a PhD in chemistry, and then went on to do some postdoctoral research, and then started my academic career in 1993 at a university in Portugal. And then in 98, I had the opportunity to come back to the US. And I came back, I was an adjunct assistant professor in the University of California, Davis. And then 3 years later, I moved to LSU, where I've been now for almost 21 years. So I've lived here longer than, that I have lived anywhere else. But I have one son, just one son, which I was already 40 years old when I had my son. I had already turned in my package to become a full professor of chemistry. And so, now he's a teenager. So, I just feel very blessed that I didn't miss the bus here, because I was traveling and doing a lot of different types of things, starting from scratch as assistant professor 3 times until I finally did my 10-year and went on to full professor. But I think my number one strategy is to manage my time to be as efficient as I can, for doing the tasks that I need to do to get what I need to do done. And this includes, and it's very important to include also my well-being and some time for myself, and to exercise, and to read or do something that so I don't feel overwhelmed about things that I could have done that I didn't do. So I manage my time, and actually having my son, I think, gave me another perspective in life, and I think he helped me with the time management, because I was not very good at that earlier. And also what I like to do is to engage others in the community. Of course, I have my husband here only. All my whole Portuguese family is back home, back in Portugal. And so, but I have friends, and I have my research group, and I have my colleagues, and I have my neighbors. And so we all create a community. And, if one of us, might need something, we are all there to offer assistance. And that has helped me a lot, because I'm from simple things of I needed to attend a meeting or give a lecture, and I needed to drop my son with my neighbor, or my graduate student, or somebody I know, of course, and trust, but at the same time, I also, even though I only have one son, I love to be surrounded by all his friends, and I always offer, just bring me your kids. I'm this Saturday and Sunday, I'm available at this time. I'd love to play with these kids, or have the kids come and play at my house, and so just as much as I can, create a community of people that you can rely on and count on. And they support you, and you support them, and it does take a village to do everything that we need to do. Also, I as a full professor, a lot of my duties now involve reading, writing, And I know when my son was younger, actually, in the first year of that my son was born, it was one of the most productive in my academic career because I stayed home most of the time. I already had my group working in the lab, and I had the students organizing their projects. And so I read and wrote, and writing takes time. And so there are quite a lot of things that you can do that will allow you to be productive in your academic life, working at home, and I was not very good with Zoom. I'm still not very good at Zoom anyway, even though, we've been all forced to use Zoom. But, there's some bright things about that. It really keeps you in touch with a lot of people, all over the world. I've given lots of Zoom seminars in the last year. I've kept in touch with all my students, those that graduated and those that are still working in the group, because, with Zoom, we can sometimes even be closer actually, as Homero said, schedule, half hour to talk with this one and then an hour to talk with that one, and other meetings that are group meetings with everybody. And so, you try to be flexible and accessible, and just make the most of your time at home when you need to stay at home and you don't have a lot of daycare options. You can still be productive at home.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Stephen, you're next.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Podowitz Thomas. I use he, him pronouns, and I identify as queer and a queer parent. I have 2 children, and our daughter is currently 5 years old and is in kindergarten, and our second child is almost 7 months old, almost. Both of them joined our family through open adoption, which means we know that when they were newborns, which means we are in touch with their birth parents and they know who the birth family is. I'm currently in my 3rd year as an assistant professor of chemistry at Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And I have a background in engineering, so a little different than chemistry, but related, of course. I have somewhat of a non-traditional path to academia as well, in that after I graduated from my PhD, I worked at a mid-sized startup company, and then for about 2 years before returning to academia into a tenured track position, following some time in a non-tenured track position for 3 years at a different institution that I'm currently at in the Philly area as well. So I had a little trouble kind of deciding between 2 strategies, but I did settle on one, and it's somewhat related to Gracia's, but with a little bit of a twist. And that's really finding a parenting community in particular outside of work was really important to me. I think as academics, I think many of us tend to find community within our work environment, particularly when we live in an area that, isn't where we know a lot of people or knew a lot of people before we came to academics, right? Came to academia. And this was the case for my husband and I for sure, before we moved to Philadelphia, so we moved to Philadelphia when our daughter was 5 months old. And so before that, I forgot to mention that we had my daughter when I was a postdoc in a postdoc position, and that we obviously had our son very recently when I was in this tenure track position. So 2 very different experiences. And so we moved when my daughter was about 5 months old to Philadelphia from North Carolina, where I was in this postdoc position, and my husband was in a different position as well down there. And so we didn't really have that parenting environment outside of, or parenting community outside of like our work environment. Sort of who we knew was where we worked, right? And a lot of people weren't parents, some people were, a lot of people weren't. But when we moved here, we moved to Philadelphia, we became involved in the queer parenting community, which has been really invaluable for us. Just to have a community of support outside of work that we can go to when we're navigating situations with our children, with childcare, and it's just there to kind of commiserate about being a parent outside of our work environment. So outside of the pressures of, dealing with talking about parenting in the work environment, which can be a little bit fraught. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. And Roshanique.
So the trials of going last is that everyone uses your strategies. But my name is Rochelle Quarles. I'm a second-year assistant professor at Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey, working in the chemistry and biochemistry department. I had my daughter who just turned 7 last week while I was in graduate school at LSU. So it was a very different experience. I was actually 9 months pregnant when I defended my candidacy. So it was very trying, but we made it through, obviously. I did a postdoc at Vanderbilt, and of course, that meant we were moving to Nashville, just the two of us. And we moved to Glassboro last year after 3 years in Nashville. So I have, I will tell you my specific strategies. One of them is be dedicated to your family time. So I am very cognizant of not doing work on Friday nights because that is family movie night, or on Sundays because that is our family day. So whether we're going to the observatory or a museum or what have you, those 2 days are my family days. So if you send me an email on Friday after 5 p.m., I will not respond. If you send me an email on Sunday, I will not respond, but you have to be dedicated to that time. Saturday mornings, I get up and I do work. In the evenings, we'll do grocery shopping and errands, but I'll, of course, respond to emails then. But those other 2 days are dedicated to my daughter and our family and making sure that we have that time and create new memories. My other strategy was making parenting packs or carpools. As Stephen pointed out, it is difficult for us as academic parents to meet people outside. So I use my daughter to introduce me to other people. Often they are working parents as well. And so being able to make parent packs allows me to work late 2 to 3 days a week because someone else is watching her until 6. And so I have a little bit more time, right? And I'll pick up the slack for them on those other 2 or 3 days. And it works for me. So I won't say it'll work for everyone, but you've built this relationship with some people outside, had a few play dates, you know them as parents and hopefully as people and build a trust there.
Great, thank you. So the next portion of our panel is for questions that are going to be asked to kind of the whole group. I have some specific questions that I want to kind of toss to specific panelists. And audience, if you have questions that you would like answered, if you would put them in the chat, we can visit that sort of as we go. The first question I want to ask was not one that was previously submitted, but Stephen and Roshanique both brought up this idea of like having a community. And so I'd love to hear if you have like specific strategies for how to find that community. So Roshanique, you mentioned, sort of through your daughter, you've met people maybe at her school or what have you. But does anybody have other strategies for meeting folks who might be able to become kind of your support system or your circle?
I can talk a little bit about kind of the queer parenting group that we're involved in, and I imagine I would hope there might be analogous groups for kind of folks with other sort of identities or interests in different like local metro areas or communities. One thing that I don't know that queer folk are always aware of as they become parents is that there are quite a bit of queer communities in all sorts of not just metro areas, but rural areas as well. And some of them function in person, but also some function online as well. And sometimes just having on that online community, particularly if you're in a rural area, which a lot of institutions are, can be really important. Some of it is, about things that we talked about. Some of the value in these kind of communities is in sort of, navigating childcare and other things that really matter in person, but other times it's about just sort of needing support, right? And someone else that's going through something similar.
I fully agree with Stephen's point, and I'm in a rural area, so I relate to those challenges. But one thing that social media is tricky, but one thing that has been really useful for me is finding a group of people from Venezuela. And of course, there are not many here in Blacksburg, but I went online on Facebook and found Venezuelans in Virginia. And that's a group, and I joined it, and I started just checking out what they were doing. And they do have a huge community that meets virtually. And, again, this is not focused on parenting, but the support has been great. And sometimes you just need to have that support group. And so I would fully agree with that.
Great. There really is a group for everything, isn't there? Gracia, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just would add there are lots of volunteer opportunities, groups that you can help with various things, related to church, related to animals, and there are a lot in your area. And if you volunteer your time, you meet a lot of nice people. Lots of nice people, and that's especially important if you are in a new place and you don't know anybody. You need a little sense about where to go to, various things, shopping, haircut, whatever. And the volunteering in some of these groups, even women leadership or outreach groups, or just give talks, or now we that are chemists can do some chemistry demonstrations, or just be involved. It's very easy to be involved. And also within the university, there's those people that you work with in your department, but there are also a lot of other groups and people in other areas of study, and there are student-led organizations, and there's many people doing interesting things, writing groups. And so if you become more involved, of course, time is always a problem, but there's book clubs, game clubs, you name it. So become involved and be open to meet other people. Also be accessible and flexible with your time management. So sometimes just be open to new opportunities to meet people or be introduced to people that you might not have if you are just set, this is what I'm going to do for the next 3 hours. That's it. Just I try to be flexible and accessible for some new opportunities and meet new people.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to go to some of the pre-submitted questions. On this one, I want to see if Skylar can give us some insight on. The question was, have any of you, or have you had to sacrifice your academic goals because you were a parent, or sacrifice your parenting goals because of your job? And if so, how did you cope with that?
That's a great question. And I would say yes, yes, yes. I feel like just as part of the human condition, there's always a trade-off. And so some or many like academically minded people are type A perfectionist, and you sort of have this framework or schema where you've got everything really tightly dialed down, and
at least especially over the past couple of years, I've learned like things just don't work out that way. So one of the things, like I mentioned, was just learning to kind of intentionally drop the ball and just manage your own expectations. And so truth be told, with COVID, I mean, I'm kind of one of those people, I think like many of us, I've got all of these brilliant ideas, great ideas, innovative teaching techniques and things that I want to roll out. And sometimes I'll start working on it. I've done some of the research, I'm trying to implement whatever it is. And it just becomes clear, like it's not going to work out. My husband was traveling March through May or something like that. And he was in Korea. And it was me and my 4 kids. And there were definitely some things that I had kind of planned out and had a timeline and an ideal way that I thought things were going to work out. I just went to my my boss and kind of went, you know what, I'm going to need, just ask for more time. You know, if it's something to kind of, if you're trading off your family responsibilities for academic things, you have to be gentle with yourself. I feel like we're our own worst critic. And so sometimes it's also a matter of kind of talking to yourself as if you were talking to your good friend or best friend. If they came to you and said, you know what, I am really swamped at work and my kids have, I mean, for me, it was like trying to get 4 different kids, the 3-year-old, the kindergartner, the middle schooler, and the high schooler to a lot of their extracurricular things after school, and just spending a whole bunch of time in the car. That typically when my husband was in town, I was able to kind of trade off some responsibilities with him. And it was just clear it wasn't going to happen. So kind of be gentle with yourself and go, you know what, like it's okay. Also for me, kind of applying that 10-10-10 framework. So if I didn't do this, roll out this project back in April, it wasn't really going to matter 10 years down the line. It wasn't really even going to set me back 10 months. And so I was kind of okay with that, you know, in terms of feeling comfortable with that decision and not having tons of anxiety. And I think in some cases, the vice versa, you know, kind of applies. Where my kids are asking for something or need something, that's when, you know, as Roshanique and Stephen kind of mentioned, and Romero, reaching out to community. I think Gracia, all of us have kind of talked about that. So oftentimes there are people sometimes who want to kind of fill that need, and you just need to seek those people out. Neighbors, we've got in my neighborhood some stay-at-home moms. So another possibility would be if your community or your neighborhood has a Facebook group, or I think Nextdoor is also something popular, kind of trying to establish friendships with those people, see if you've got similar age kids. So for a while, I was relying on a neighbor to take my 2 older children to and from some of their extracurricular activities, because there was a really critical time where I was working on some program accreditation items that had a very finite timeline that there was no way I could not do it, or it would have a significant impact. And so that's when I kind of relied on community. So I just think kind of going back to values, thinking through what things have a finite timeline that maybe you can't work around, but I feel like there's always some kind of flexibility. And sometimes it's just about thinking a little bit creatively to get to that decision.
Great, thanks, Skylar. Roshanique, I think you are the most recent person on the job market, so I have this question for you, but I imagine there might be some other thoughts from people as well. So let's just hear what you have to say. I've heard advice to not disclose you have a family during an interview, and opposing advice to not keep it a secret so you don't end up working somewhere that's not family friendly. What are your thoughts on this?
So when I went on the market, I did not tell anyone that I had a family, simply because I wanted to feel the department, right? I want to gauge other people. We talk about academics in our individual meetings, and then sometimes people get more personal, right? When you're talking about science and then family and life in the area. and why their department is better for you. And so my idea there was just to observe and take it in, because most of the time you can see who's family oriented just based on the conversations they're having. And so then when I spoke with the dean after I was given the job offer, then I mentioned my family and those kind of things, because I was coached to talk about those things later, right? Once you have the offer in hand, you can make those kind of concessions that you need then.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this particular question?
I can speak briefly. So yeah, I totally respect the decision, and I think it's, you know, a hard choice in a lot of ways. I think for me personally, I didn't hide. I mean, I wasn't sort of going out of my way to talk about that I was a parent, but it was something that I talked about for sure. I knew just for me that if anyone had an issue with me being a parent, it was gonna be an issue for me, right? So, you know, it wouldn't have been a place that was right for me. So ultimately, that was just like the decision that I made that worked for me.
And I can chime in too. I just saw this question on the sidebar pop up. And so I have been visibly pregnant twice for job interviews. And, you know, it's obviously a personal choice. At some point, I remember getting advice from one of my colleagues of like, oh, you should try to wear baggy clothing or wear something that kind of hides it. And that just was sort of internally conflicting for me. And so I went to my interview, actually for the position that I have now, visibly pregnant. And it obviously came up in conversation, but I felt like it was a good segue for me to just say, like, the work that I've done, my work ethic, my credentials sort of speak for themselves. And I also had the benefit of this being my fourth child, but I was able to say, like, I've made it this far in my career with 3 children and have accomplished all of these things. And so I really don't see how that would be a deal breaker, but it's a great litmus test to see how other people respond, obviously. And this kind of goes to what I speak to a lot of my students about in terms of going into clinical practice or medical practice, but I think it applies to any job. Outside of being at home with your family, your job oftentimes is where you're going to spend the majority of your time. And so you obviously want to be in an environment where you can kind of be yourself. And I think that includes saying that if you need to make time for family, you can do that. And if you've got childcare responsibilities every once in a while, that may preclude you from being physically present, that there's an opportunity to do that. And so I think that just brings up space, creates space for conversation around those things that ultimately do become important outside of getting the assistant professor job title, but then being somewhere where maybe you're just, you don't feel comfortable kind of being your full self.
Great. I'll just add that I had a 3-month-old when I did my site interviews at Rowan, and they sent me my schedule and I had to email them and say, actually, I'm pumping. Can you please give me 30-minute breaks every 4 hours? And they were totally fine with that. And you know, the most on top, people that are the most on top of this kind of stuff will ask you if you have any accommodations that you need. So if you're visibly pregnant, you might say, like, I can't walk across campus, you know, if it's a 2-mile walk across campus or whatever. But I think certainly asking for those accommodations if you need them, if you're interviewing, is a good litmus test for sure. All right, wonderful. Let's see. This kind of falls into the same theme. So Stephen, how do you figure out the best time to, in quotes, the best time to have kids during an academic career?
Oh, that's so hard, because I know there's this desire to plan, right? You know, you plan your tenure package, you want to plan your, you know, child, your child care and family life within that. But I think it's really hard. I really personally, honestly, for myself, I don't think there was, a best time. We were going through adoption processes, which are very extended processes that are very hard to predict. And you could go live on the adoption front, and you might place within a week, you might place within 4 years, you have no idea when it's going to be. You might go from one day not being a parent to the next day being a parent, which is what happened with our second child, or you could have 6 months notice, which was the case for our first child. So I think for us, there really wasn't a great best time. And I think if we had waited or made different decisions, we would never be parents, honestly. I think almost we kind of waited a little too long for a second child. It worked out great, but we were lucky in that we placed with our child much quicker than we expected. But we were kind of waiting between my husband and I for a good time where we wanted to feel more stable to have our second child. And it just wasn't really coming. What looked like my, promotion track was looking very different than what was his promotion track in a very different field. And they were totally diametrically opposed. And then, it turned out that he ended up just, we didn't know this was going to happen, leaving that position and going to an entirely different position and is on a totally different schedule right now. And so I think it's really hard to plan because of the transience of careers and having potentially multiple people involved. I think we just had to make the decision of when it felt right for us, knowing that if we didn't do it, it wasn't going to happen.
Thanks. Anyone else have feedback about the best timing?
I'll just say there's a reason why I only have one kid. So my first and only kid, I was already high risk because I was just over 40. And of course, if there would have been a possibility, I would have 2 or 3. I have a sister, and I know, I don't know actually, because I only have one. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4, I think it really makes things hard on young parents. But then when you grow up, I think having siblings is just the most wonderful thing in the world. And my son is going to be an only son. Of course, he has lots of friends, but it's not the same thing. And I live far away from my sister, but, I feel very, very close to her. And so I think there is not really a real good time. I think it's a blessing every time you can have a child. In my career, I almost missed it because I was, time can go by very fast, and it's never the perfect time until you just, stop planning. But just don't miss, because the biological clock doesn't stop. Okay, so it's not completely total up to you, and it's really a blessing, and it's an experience that you should not miss it if you don't have to.
One really quick thing that I think can make it a better time, though, is planning. I know for us, sort of getting all the information we needed about what it meant to be parents and getting paperwork done and the process done was really important, right? So that just made it a better time to have that all in line so that we can, could jump on it when it was felt like more of a right time.
Okay. So I'm gonna excuse me, we were going to break into smaller groups. I think I'm going to pose another 2 or so questions to the panel. If you do have questions that you want to ask of the panel, please put them in the chat. And we'll sort of just see how things are feeling after these next 2 questions. Omero, we had a question about the sort of the difference between balancing parenthood in industry compared to academia. And we know you spent some time in industry. And so I think, folks who are still in grad school are thinking about like, do I pursue the academic track or not? And so can you maybe speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, totally. I think, and again, every experience is different. So to give you context of my industry experience, because I know it's, again, very different. I work in talent management. That my most recent industry experience was in talent management for a multinational company. I was involved in recruitment of engineers around 7 different countries. And so it required a lot of travel, and it's a big company, so there were a lot of benefits as well. So I would say some of the main differences is that in industry, your working time is your working time, and that's it. You finish the day, you go home, that's it. You don't need to think about anything. You don't need to work on the weekends unless you're traveling. Very clear boundaries on where work starts and where work ends. So that gives you a lot of flexibility to be more involved in some things around the family. That being said, there is also less flexibility during those working hours. So going to a school, for example, and see the kids doing a play or that's not possible. So I guess, again, pros and cons. The other big difference was money, of course. Sad to say, but with money, you are able to outsource more things. So for example, I remember one thing that I did that was really good for me was I bought a treadmill that was really good. And so then I could use it like at the time that I wanted. And I made a trade-off of not running outside, right? I decided, okay. But then at the same time, that worked for me because I could watch my Netflix shows when I was doing my exercise. So I was double dipping right there. But again, that requires money. But then on the other side of things, I think someone mentioned that, I think Gracia mentioned that she was very productive when the kid was little. And I remember the same with my second baby. I was very productive during dissertation writing with my baby, just because I was taking care of him at night. So when he was waking up, I was feeding with formula and then trying to get him to sleep. But during that time that we spent together at 2 a.m. or whatever, I could have my computer and read some papers. And then he was falling asleep and then I wasn't tired. So my schedule was a mess. I mean, I was sleeping in random hours or whatever. But I remember those nights a lot because it was very quiet time for me and my baby. And I mixed taking care of him with reading and writing a lot, which I kind of enjoyed at the moment and don't enjoy it anymore. Let me be open about that. So I think it really depends on how you approach. I think what is important is to understand the benefits of both worlds. And okay, if you decide to take the academic path, well, it has a lot of time requirement. The boundaries on when work ends are fuzzy and difficult to identify, but at the same time, you are independent. You manage your own time. You manage your own schedule most of the time. So trying to find you can squeeze different times and different activities at different hours. Like my schedule is very different. I think someone in the panel also mentioned to be intentional about your own time. So for example, right now in my schedule, I have some days going for a walk at noon on a Thursday. And that's when it fit. And I can do that. I can leave the office, go for a 1 hour walk outside. It's nice. I come back, whatever, nothing happened. But I'm intentional about scheduling those times. Wasn't the case in industry again. But what I appreciated from industry was the fact that I didn't need to think about work, so I could fully focus when the day was over. And I could go home, enjoy whatever I wanted to enjoy, spend time more intentionally with the kids and my wife, and trade-offs. So I don't think I have a preference right now. I mean, professionally speaking, I do have a preference. I'm where I'm supposed to be. But thinking about the way that I manage parenting, I think, it's a matter of finding the benefits of both worlds.
Great, thank you. That kind of started answering another question that folks had, and like I'm fascinated by this idea that you can get work done with an infant, because that was not my experience at all. Omero just gave us a little bit of insight about how that worked for him. He just didn't sleep in the usual way. Gracia, can you share a little bit? You mentioned that you got a lot of work done when your son was very small. How did you approach sort of managing his schedule with your productivity?
Yeah, when he was really small, so I would sleep when you'd sleep. So my sleeping schedule was kind of totally out of whack, because I would just sleep when he sleep. Otherwise, I couldn't cope. And so I would write or read for 2 hours or 3 hours, and I was very concentrated. I had a very efficient at the time that I was working, and I was very efficient on the writing part when I was at home. And also, it's not only the focus factor, it's also the inspiration. I think having my kid made me much more inspired into what do I need to get to? What do I need to get done? And does this take me there or not there? So I just became more inspired, more efficient, and also I became better at putting things into perspective. Like I'll write something and I would say a research proposal, and I'll submit it. It was not funded. That was not the end of the world. I just learned from the feedback, because my perspective changed, and so I was in a different state of mind that made me more efficient at writing and working towards my goals.
Thanks. Anybody else have good tips for getting things done when your kids are tiny? I don't see anybody jumping.
So
go ahead,
infants not so much. I will say I enjoyed the little time off that I took when my daughter was born, because as both Hamira and Gracia pointed out, that I had to sleep when my daughter was sleeping. However, when it came to her being a little bit older and able to go to daycare, for example, I really kind of tried to prioritize and give myself a schedule, right? Like daycare closes at 5, so I need to leave work at 4:30, and then if I can come back, that means I went to graduate school in the same town as my family. So I would pick her up, bring her to my mom, go back to lab, work until 7, and then go home. And so having that kind of support system and a schedule was really beneficial for me. And also giving myself pre-deadlines, right? When you're a parent, lots of things come up. And so if my deadline is on December 5th, telling myself that it was November 30th and putting that in my calendar with flashing lights was very important, because, hey, I knew it was done and I had it done well before the actual date. And that way, if anything came up, she got sick, or I needed to go get my car done, right? You get a tire, flat tire, whatever the case may be, life happens. Then I kind of built that time in. Yeah, So those are my tips for trying to be productive with little people.
Yeah, that's a really great point that bad stuff happens. Not like, shit happens, right? Like the kid's sick from daycare, the daycare has a COVID exposure. Like you need to have some kind of previous structure already in place so that doesn't completely derail your entire life, which feels like it's happened a lot in the last 2 years.
Relatedly, just really quickly, I think for me, particularly with a newborn this past summer, it was, I think, really helpful for me to be unapologetically a parent and a working parent. My second child attended basically all of my group meetings, so like over Zoom, and I was writing a few proposals, and he was yelling while I was, for most of the time, for 50% of the time, while I was trying to like lead, collaborator meetings. And luckily I have very understanding collaborators, but, I was just very open about the situation, and that, I didn't have leave, and I was going to get leave, and I had a child, and I was going to be working with a child there yelling. And if I needed to step aside or get him a bottle, like it had to happen, right? And so I think leaving space for yourself to do that, right? I think was important to me. Just let myself do that.
Wonderful. I want to close with a question that is kind of a different vein, and it's related to kind of the systemic structures that affect parents. And so somebody asked, what would it look like for universities to adjust parent workloads or caregiver workloads in general, right? Because we also have the other side of people caring for their parents. In a way that is both equitable and realistic. And I'm wondering if any of you have ideas about like what institutions can be doing so that it's not kind of just like, well, if you get lucky with a great department chair, you'll be fine. And otherwise, good luck.
I'll take a stab at it. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but part of my role right now, in addition to teaching and some scholarship, is being the diversity, equity, inclusion officer for the program. And part of the benefit of the structure of that role is that it is tied to institutional support. And so that's kind of given me a stage to bring some of these issues up, to say that this in some ways is an inclusivity issue, right? Or an equity issue. And so although I don't feel like I've made tons of progress in the way that I've wanted to, got kind of this strategic framework, one of the things that I have been able to get some buy-in to is just sitting down and doing a faculty workload table and looking to see what does it look like considering each person's kind of individual role and their responsibilities, but then also kind of putting on their hats of identities. So we've got some faculty in our department who have children who are all in college, right? They've got nothing but time on their hands, at least it seems to me. So they're typically the people that are in the office all the time and sort of at least very visible. And it's sort of obvious that they are here and potentially being productive, right? Whereas some other people who maybe are caring for elderly parents, which we do have some of those individuals, or have very young children, like our day just looks different. And so one of the things that we are still in the process of negotiating, but I feel like COVID sort of ripped the Band-Aid off to say, like we need some flexible work conditions. And so that might mean maybe from a more of an institutional or administrative perspective or lens, taking a deep dive into workload and just looking at whether or not workload's equitable. not only from like course hours or credit hours, but also who are these people, right? That we're wanting to take care of and that we're asking to do a lot of various things, and what is their service load, I think was another really important thing. That obviously once you're in academics, you kind of have this three-legged stool. So what's their research impact? And maybe once all of that's been factored in, there can be a rebalancing of the scales, so to speak. And in some cases that means like maybe we need to hire another faculty member to do something. I don't know, but I think I don't have a good like straightforward answer, but I think a lot of it has to come from an institutional level, where there's a lot of attention paid to the environment and roles and responsibilities, and not trying to apply a formula in sort of a monolithic way, but making considerations for everybody's sort of lived experiences in that formula.
I will add that, I mean, sadly, I need to start by recognizing that this is a very bad system. All the conversation that I had this week with people is, oh, I'm looking forward to the break to recharge and disconnect. And the fact that we need to say that and we normalize that is a meaning that we are in a system that is burdening and that is taking us to extremes where we are using our vacation time and our holiday time or whatever break time to actually go back to normal. And that's not okay. I think it is really important that we recognize that the system was created not for everyone and has a lot of issues adapting to the complexities that multiple identities bring into academia. I think we need to organize. I think we need to bring groups together. We need to use our professional societies. We need to use our national conferences. We need to create workshops. We need to start just letting people and having opportunities like this one to share their experiences, so those experiences can be replicated and can be heard by multiple people, and we can start creating more awareness. It's not something that's going to change. Yes, universities are extremely slow to change, but I do think that it's important that we do this and we raise our voices and we share the way that we are experiencing our work, because that not only helps with starting to get some recognition, but that also helped with people building community and with people finding mentors, and with especially, for example, grad students seeing, oh, there is a person that went through my same situation. I can go and talk to them because they made it. They are, I mean, there are ways I need to talk and connect with those people. So I think it's a massive problem. I think we need to keep sharing our experiences.
Great.
So just to add I guess, a more specific example, because I do have a young daughter who is in school. I actually schedule my classes around her schedule. So my course time is in the middle of the day intentionally. So I actually teach back-to-back classes and forego lunch or have a late lunch, because I want to be able to be out of class when she's out of school. So she gets out of school at 2:50 every day. So that means I need to be done by at least 2 o'clock to travel the 30 minutes home and give myself time if there's traffic, right? And so my chair and the scheduling person are in agreement with me. They say they understand. And so they don't schedule me before 9 o'clock because her school lets in at 9, well, 8:50, and then it's out at 2:50. So they don't schedule me to have a class that ends after 3 o'clock. And so working with the department or whoever is doing the scheduling is important. And the same thing goes for department meetings. So because of COVID, there was flexibility, right? So now we're continuing to do virtual meetings, which helps those parents who need to travel to go and pick up their kids. We have meetings at 3 o'clock. So, hey, on Mondays, every other Monday, I can Zoom in and still be a productive member of the department and the department meeting. So I think there are ways to do this, and we just have to stay consistent, right? As Skylar pointed out, the Band-Aid was ripped off. We just have to continue to use those resources that are available to us and not go back to the old ways just because they that was what was done previously, right?
I completely agree. And I think one thing on top of that is also, oftentimes, at least in the experiences that I've had in the institutions I've been at, things tend to sort of happen below board a little bit. Things aren't always explicit. So, you know, if you ask about it, like, people are open to doing it, but a lot of people don't know that it's okay to ask about it. And I think being really explicit about what you want the culture to be at institutions and what the administrators doing this and what the policies are, right? Like what the perspectives are, can be really important too. So, you know, maybe you're doing these things like, you know, having flexible hours or thinking about, you know, the best times to schedule faculty, but just making sure it's like really explicit why you're doing that and that people can come and ask about it and request it. So it's not just the people who, you know, knew someone that did it, and so they did it.
I'll just add that I think I agree with everything that has been said. I'll just add that I think many institutions have a problem with retention of faculty. And so they have realized, and this is something that industry realized long ago, you know, you have to keep people happy so they stay and work in your industry. So now, you know, retention is an obvious problem that administrators are trying to tackle. And they are, you know, there's different strategies from, you know, additional funds or seed funds for research or for teaching, or reduced teaching schedules, or you know, even being even having a school on campus. You know, we haven't talked about this because we talk about the young kids, but when the kid, you know, is a little bit older, then if the school is 10 or 15 miles away, then it's a lot of traveling, you know. So a lot of institutions are now having their own, you know, even schools and preschools on campus, you know, and they use that one example of a retention strategy. And when we're talking about, you know, do you say you're pregnant when you interview? I think actually some people are quite open about that to see if there are any schools on campus, or how is the school system in this state. Or, you know, if you have a partner, a lot of institutions actually go through the effort of finding a position either in the same department or a different department in the university. And so they can attract you to your institution and they can retain you there. As I think that we should not keep you know, everything to ourselves and just say something when we're about to explode. I think it's there's quite a lot of people that can be open to you know, help us manage the situation, so it's a lot easier for us, you know, with either when you're teaching, or when the timing of the timing of meetings or whatever. I think that discussion has started and it just cannot die out.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I think we're going to wrap things up here. I know Robert wants to just add one little thing, and so I'm going to add him back to the spotlight. So I wanted to personally thank the panelists. I really enjoyed learning from all of you and getting to know you a little bit. I think this was a really informative panel, and hopefully our participants agree. Robert, would you like to wrap us up?
Yes, thank you, Kaitlin, and thank you to all of our panelists. That was a fantastic discussion. I really appreciate you all sharing your insights and your experiences and what has worked for you. And as a new father, I have a 6-month-old. I learned a lot, so this was incredibly useful. So thank you all so much, and thank you, Kaitlin. We really appreciate you taking the time and the initiative to facilitate this session. So we really appreciate that. I would like to quickly share a link in the chat. We have an evaluation survey we would like to share. And we'd like you to take it and let us know how we did. So the link there is in the chat and you can fill out that survey. I will take the recording and we will post it on our YouTube channel, and I will let all of the registrants know. I'll send an email out when that is posted.
Robert, I think that the survey link went straight to me instead of to everyone.
Thank you. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Let me send that to everybody. There we go. Okay. So you should now have the survey link. It's just a brief evaluation survey, and we really appreciate it if you would let us know how we did. So anything else that you'd like to say, Kaitlin?
I don't think so. I think I really, again, appreciate folks being here, and I hope you learned something new. And let us know if you try any of the strategies and they work for you. I'd love to hear. And I'd like just to wish everybody a easy end of the semester and restful winter break.
Yes, 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 indeed. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Have a good afternoon and a good weekend.